Okay, my friends, I'm gonna again continue with the next level of interview questions. Get ready. In this case, I wanted to start with SCCM console side. So what are the log files you would verify if you're not able to connect to SCCM console? Or whatever the activities you perform. For example, on this machine, there are maybe 2-3 users has been connected, or it went wrong, it's not opening at all. So what are the log files you would be verifying? To answer that, to begin with that, to confirm the log file name, if you can go back to the SCCM wherever it is installed under in this case program files E drive, Microsoft Configuration Manager admin console, under this admin UI log, under this you have the log files. So this is where the logs can be used, and these are the logs will be can be explain more on why it is not getting connected, or whatever the problems you have. Everything will be addressed here. For example, if I close this console, it will say that hey, console has been closed. If you can remember, the background of this log is again SMS provided, because if you can check these things which are coming as SMS underscore, this is a bonus information for you. Maybe the question is not related to this, but if you see anything as SMS underscore, that means it is coming from SMS provider. If you find as V or maybe underscore something else, that might be possible with SQL database. So these are the things. And by the way, we can also open up here and show you that information under SQL related SQL DBmon. So you can ask, maybe somebody can ask that, hey, what is the log file for the SQL database related information? So you should be looking into this SQL DBmon.log file. So this is a log file which talks about the database activities. So there is a SQL in the right side. Assume that you have the right side as a SQL database, and when you're trying to connect with the SCCM console, so in the background, SMS provider will go and establish the connection with the SQL database, which is in the right side. So in other way, the provider is key here. It becomes, or it is acting as an intermediate here. So I would put it in that way. These are the things. If you can see here, this is the database related log file. You don't see very similar to that, but if any of the errors related to the SQL server, this is where you need to check it. And also the best and first place, at least from my point of view, if you are the beginner, or you can simply check under site status here. That would actually tells about complete components level any of the problems. So I would think about it. If this is right, for example, in this case, on my management point, something wrong. So the component name is, in this case, it's a component server. So that component server related error is running on this machine. If I want more detail, maybe sometimes it will be showing here that component specific. So if I can see here, I'm not able to manage the management point related errors. So the next question is, what is the management point log file you refer? So if the management point is working fine or not, how do you verify? That's a question. To answer to that question, you can open the log file called mpcontrol.log file. So let me open that mpcontrol.log file. This is a log file to be open. Hey, if you're the basic guy, if you're the beginner, okay, how do you know, or how can you remember these log files? In fact, I did talk about all these things in my course. You can check out there. But if you want to remember forever all the log files, I would recommend the best way and easiest method, at least in my point of view. Maybe it may or may not be for you, but I feel that's the easiest way. Okay, let me put that way for you. So you simply have to go to the here and open up the configuration manager, service manager. So this is nothing but a I put it in another way, all the components, whatever you have related to the SCCM, all the components, trust me, all those components are visible here. So you can see here Active Directory, something Azure AD related. So this mechanism not yet open. If you can go back to our discoveries, so we don't have the Azure AD discovery mechanism here. If you can remember in the previous interview questions, when we talked about our discovery method, we did not talk about the Azure AD here, but still the component is there, the core functionality is there. So if you want to know the that specific component related log files, so you have here all the logs, right? So all the logs, whether they are started or whatever the functionality it is doing. See, sometimes what happens is not everything, what you visible is may not be true for sometimes, right? Say example, the service which is in a running state, trust me, at least in a 1 year a while, you would face this problem. So the most important critical services for SCCM would be SMS executive as well as the component manager. So let's have a look on the component manager. Component manager is the individual service which is responsible to start and enable all these components to be function properly. Sometimes what happens is in the SCCM console, maybe a specific component is not working. For example, let's take policies are not coming, or maybe a management point is not properly working. But when you check these services, it might be in a running state. It doesn't mean that if it is running state, it is actually working. So the story is here, whatever you're able to see on the screen, may not be true. So if you want to drill down further in depth, okay, I'm talking about the in depth, in that situation you would be going back to the component manager. So that specific service, which is this, so if a person is triggering this stop and stop, that means he's actually stopping all these components internally. Say example, you have a management team maybe asking you, hey, who stopped the services? So it will be a question for you, because you are actually not touching one service, you are touching the core related SCCM services. So you should be very careful what you're trying to do with. And anyway, for now, the question would be, how would you remember forever the log file name? So I would recommend that open up this and try to read these components at least once or twice. Maybe whenever you are trying to learn the logs, just open up that and see if anything is relevant to that. And for example, if in this case we thought about Azure AD discovery, in this case what is that, this one, right? So whether the service is in a working state or not. So think that discovery, do you think discovery will always in a running state? No. When the schedule comes, it runs and then it stops. That's the common way of thought process should be there. So let's actually a query. Query means here it just tells whether the status of that service. So I'm just querying, so it is still running state in this case. And if you want to stop it, for example, you can stop that and it stopped. But you want to know about the activities which is doing this component. So in my videos I did also explain in my course, if you can remember, when you open up this, okay, when you open up this especially the configuration manager, service manager, you should be in a way of thinking that all these somewhere related to your inboxes also, right? So if you can remember, some of them, at least not all, but some of them would be also related to the inbox. So when you try to learn the combination of inboxes as well as the components in a combination, for example, here if I take it somewhere here, let's take one meaningful one to explain to you, maybe hierarchy manager example. So this hierarchy manager is nothing but your the hierarchy related information it would be talking about. For example, the replication, whether it is properly reporting, and the child side information, all that comes under hierarchy manager. But in the way you should learn, always combine, try to combine these hierarchy managers. Somewhere here there should be inbox also. So if you just go to the H, okay, Hman box is there. So whether these are related, so something in that way you should be thinking about it. And then if you're trying to learn, the second one would be the log file. So just right click on that and say logging. Okay, so when you take the logging process, and this is where the log file is located. So this is how you should be understanding the logs, and from there you need to think about it. And sometimes, or the most of the time, the logs actually overwritten, because the size which you just saw as the 2 MB is the limit. So make sure that you have the proper enough space as well as the logging should be no more than 10 MB at least, or at least the 10 MB, so that the activities are not get easily overwritten. Say example, something went wrong and you raise a case with Microsoft comes into the picture and they say that, hey, I can resolve, but give me a logs. So by the time the logs already archived or maybe overwritten, even though if you take the backup of those logs, maybe there, but since the 2 MB is very limit, in fact, if you look at the size of the log it is writing is overwritten, and very often or very quickly in a day. So it's better that set all the components to a certain level, maybe 5 MB or 10 MB, whatever you think that it is good, and then look all these logs. So combine the components and inboxes and then look at the logs. This is the logic to find out. So now coming back to the actual question, the management point related log. So you can think about the management point. Here you can check it here, SMS underscore somewhere M space. So if you can look at here, MP control manager and also MP file dispatch, all these are the MP related functionality will be done. So you should know that there is another functionality which is related to MP control, and there are two in fact here. If you can see here, one would be the actually MP name and other one would be the site server, a different one altogether. And because the components are partially there and here on the two machines, because this infrastructure, if you can see here, the MP is enabled on this machine, -MP01, and the SCCM server installed on -CM01. So that's why here you are able to see here both the things. And let's open up the log file in this case, and this is a log file. You need to look into that machine. So on that machine, because if you think here the logic, this is the location of this machine, that is CM01, not on the MP on 01, because we clicked on the CM01. If we click on MP01, so we need to open from there the log file, but it remains, you can actually open up all those components directly from here. You can check that the query of that state, as well as the stopping. If I'm just stopping, or it's just stopping, and the query finally whether it is stopped or not. So since it is a management point, it takes some time, but if you want to look at the logs to this, you can find out this is a log file which is available on that specific machine. So let's look at the log which is -mp01 slash whatever the path. So in this case it's going to be $. By default Windows will share all the drives with the $share. So I'm just opening with the $. So it opens the log file. So I can see here whether the management point is stopped because we initiated the stop action. So you can see here shutdown actions, and that entire information is available here. So somewhere here all that information is coming up, right? So this is how you troubleshoot related to the management point. So the next question would be, what exactly the WQL and SQL? So the WQL is nothing, it's all about your WMI related query language. That's called WQL, Windows Query Language we also called, and that is purely coming out of your WMI. When you look at the SQL is the structured query language. So where you work, where you store the entire inventory information database is SQL Server. So when you try to create here on SCCM Server the collections, so for example you create a co-management pilot as a collection. In this case, this collection is coming up from this is a direct query. Okay, if you're trying to create any of the queries here, which is, for example, I want all my non-SCCM clients example. So I'm actually writing here a query altogether. This is a different query. So this query is nothing but a WQL query. So when I write this in the background, what happens is, relevant to this, I'm also writing related to SQL database. So what happens is, in the between, who's the mediator here? The SMS provider, right? So SMS provider will write another query related to SQL database. So that's why whatever you do it here, which will be recorded in the SQL SMS provider. Let's go and open up. So we just created something here, and the logs SMS prove.log, which is SMS provider log file. So in this case, if you open up this, so we just created something here. So that would be, for example, this is the collection ID, if I'm correct. 14 is the collection ID. Let's go and check that. So since here it's not listed here, I'm just adding the collection ID. It should be listed here by this time. I'm just going right side. So you can see here, this is the collection. So in the background, whatever the query we have written, to relevant to that, it has written somewhere, and also it is redirected that query to the SQL database. So for example, somewhere collection. So somewhere here, it would write definitely or related, and then I'm sorry, it just went up. Let's go up. If I just go and check it here, if you see here, collections order, so whatever the things we are trying to do, so all that it is actually performing in the SQL. So we also talked about in the previous interview questions also the importance of the SQL provider. Let's jump into another question. Also, before we jump into another question, the conclusion is the queries are completely different when you talk about the WQL as well as the SQL. So you can't use from here to there or there to here. So both are unique, and both are meant for a different purpose. That should be the conclusion. And one more question is here, when you actually do here update membership, what will happen? So when you actually the question would be, when you do the collection update membership, what would happen? That could be a question. So to answer that, you need to put it in other way. So the collection properties, in fact, technically speaking, under collection properties, these collections are scheduled to update. Here it was not written, but they are scheduled to update by default 7 days. In fact, this should be there, but somehow it was taken out by someone in this lab, or maybe they configured in such a way that not to update a full membership. But the practically, if you take any of the collection, it is by default 7 days. That means instead of you're waiting for 7 days to fully discover, you are actually forcing to do one more collection membership to be updated. That means the membership to be updated. So example, it's simple that you take some membership, and so you are updating, you are telling that these machines are part of this this collections, and when you do a normal refresh, it might not come up the newly devices, because the machines must be updated, and the query should be run. So the query only will run. For example, this is a query in the background. It's not coming up, but if you remember in the previous question, we configured this query SDF, which is inactive all the clients. So this is a query, right? So this query only runs when you update the collection membership, or when you use the incremental update. Otherwise it will not be. So I would put it, if you change the collection name, maybe refresh works, but refresh is different than the update membership. So you should be fair enough to explain this kind of explanation to the in the interview. The next question would be, what's the difference between, in fact we covered this question, but just to ask you without telling the answer, maybe you can check it. What's the difference between the applications based deployment and the package based deployment? So the other way, applications are the advanced configuration for you, or when you're trying to deploy, what happens is the exact point is that it will validate whether this package is really already installed and whether this package is really applicable. In the legacy mechanism, when I say legacy, the packages method, it doesn't verify whether the package is already installed or not. It simply puts that command line, which is nothing but a programs if you take this as the one of the program command, whatever here the program is there, that would be automatically triggered on the target machines. But whereas the applications are fully intelligent way, it's going to be really evaluate whether the software is available or not, because it's we configure in the applications. If you can check the applications, there is a detection method, so it's going to detect whether, hey, this specific application is already existing or not. And also the more powerful one would be the two options. One would be the deployment type. That means if the client machine is coming from a MSI deployment should be done, or AppV deployment, or maybe a iOS related app to be deployed. Some kind of different methods can be configured on top of the deployment types. And also when you look at the other deployments, like the global conditions are the key here. So it's gonna verify whether these conditions are met or not. For example, under requirements, you can set these conditions here, whether this device is has this memory, or whether this is part of Intune management, or you can create your own global conditions and you can recall them again and again. So that's a more powerful one. You can give this kind of an explanation uh, for this question. But you can check the references in my course under section 9, software distribution, which I covered more than 4 hours by covering all the possible scenarios. You can check it here, and started from the normal applications and the legacy applications and the differences in detail I covered along with the log files. The next question would be, do we need to extend a schema? Is it a mandatory? So these kind of questions you may encounter. So for this question to answer, it's not mandatory. Who said it's a mandatory? We never said, but it's recommended. By having schema extended, it's really a recommended step. That's what we can give you answer. If somebody asks an explanation, give explanation as this. So if you look at the on the schema machine, wherever we extended, so we did extended with the schema with the extadch.exe. This is the file used to extend the schema, and this step will be done by schema admins only, not by us, right? So whoever extending the schema, they must have to give back the log file, which is nothing but, if let me extend the schema, for example, so this is a log file gets created. So you need to understand these are the values gets created. So what are these values and where these values will be there? If you remember, in the previous questions also we talked about under system management container, so these values will be created. So not everything is visible for you. Let me open the system management container. So under Active Directory, you should be taking the advanced features, systems management, sorry, the top one, and here these values will not be there when you extend it, in fact. So what happens is our SCCM server will go and write these values. So you may have a question maybe internally, is it going to be any standard of writing? Yes. When you extend, if you can read these values, let's take one of the example here. In fact, this is already extended, that's why we are getting in the log file as already extended. So just ignore that because we don't have the log. And let's have a look on something here. Almost the first line, if you can look at here, canonical name or container name, ms-sms site code. So this is the template. So you have a template. Now what happens is, in this template you're going to fill the value. So who's going to fill the value? By our SCCM server. Where is our SCCM server? So if I go back to my SCCM server here, in this case CM01, I may have to log in, looks like. So on this server, what happens is your SCCM site, so when I say site, so this is where under site configuration, this site is going to be publish the values on your SCCM on your Active Directory or under system management container. How would you find that information? So this task will be published under hman.manager, h manager, so hierarchy manager in fact. So hman.log file. So let me open this log file. So hierarchy manager, in fact in the few minutes back we talked about the hierarchy manager, but if you look at open the hierarchy manager, so it says that somewhere hman, oh it's got let's validate site. Yeah, it's going to be, if you look at here, it's just checking the values. Oh, it's gone up really. One second, let me show you. That took a minute because it got archived, but if you can look at here in the hman.log file, it is actually searching for the Active Directory and it's going to the system management container and it will write that value if it is not existed. So in this case, the template is getting filled here, CM equivalent, the canonical name equivalent to SMS hyphen site code. Then the site code is in this case PO1, right? So the PO1 getting filled up, that means it's going to write that value. If value is already present, it says that hey, value is already there, because every time it will start validating with this Active Directory site code. Clients will determine. So what happens is client has a functionality. When I say client, what exactly the client, SCCM client has a binaries, right? That binaries has a mechanism or a software. So it's a client, it's not but a software, right? The software is designed in such a way to communicate all the time. Try to, hey, go back to your systems, go back to your Active Directory and look for this specific system management container. So under this SMS system management container, if you find anything with your existing matching subnet ID, hey, think that that's your boundary, okay? And check that also the site code. So it just thinks that, hey, do I allow, I'm coming from this IP subnet, and is there anything is matching? So if these boundaries are part of some of the active some of the groups, that's nothing but is your boundary groups, and the site assignment is allowed, that information you actually published in systems management container, right? So it just pulls that information and it will try to communicate with the it knows that how where to go and what is the site code to be used, what is the management point to be used. All that information it will pull from your Active Directory. So it's so easy, I know, if you can understand these logics and when you try to answer for the question to answer, in fact. So this kind of detailed information you need to have. Let's jump into another question. Maybe people often confuse us. This would be another question, in fact. So people often confuse what exactly the hardware inventory and what is the software inventory. And if people ask somebody, maybe your colleague or somebody asks, hey, is add and remove programs, whatever you're able to see in the add and remove programs, say example in the add and remove programs, you are able to see that these are the softwares got installed, right? Installed programs. In the add and remove programs are maybe the latest name programs and features. So you're able to see all these softwares are coming as installed, right? So now the question, just to make you as confused, is this coming from hardware inventory or software inventory? So people, if you are the new guy, you think that, hey, how can this be a hardware, because this is software we are talking about. So you may answer it's a software, but that's wrong, in fact. So this is part of hardware inventory. Why and how? So let's talk about the differences between hardware and software. Then you come to know what exactly this hardware or software inventory. So hardware inventory basically works based on the WMI mechanism. So to jump into any further, in fact, you need to understand a resource explorer. So the first and most easiest way, in my point of view at least, the easiest way to understand about the hardware inventories, you first explore a resource explorer and check whatever it is coming under hardware, that's the part of hardware inventory. Simple. So if you look at under hardware, you would somewhere here get as the installed program. So let's install applications, right? So this is coming from hardware inventory. So if you see somewhere here 64, that means it's a 64 redirection, in fact. So the machines are nowadays 64-bit. Some of the applications still running as a 32-bit, so it will list based on that. mechanism. Okay, so whatever you are able to see, this is the easiest way to differentiate. Whatever you are able to see under hardware, it's a hardware. Whatever you're able to see under software, that's for software. But how this works is a question maybe. So in fact we talked very detailedly under our sections related to hardware inventory and software inventory and software metering. If you can revise them, or if you can go back and focus on them, it really helps you to understand about the hardware inventory, software inventory. So I'm going to talk about the highest level, what exactly this mechanism. These are the things I'm gonna repeat in a short in fact to answer this question. So what happens is the inventory mechanism what we configure is coming from WMI. So for SCCM you have a client agent, so that client agent to be configured to pull that hardware inventory. So whatever you configure to pull the inventory information, that only will come. Whereas the software inventory is a completely different. So you need to just go back to the client agents or client agent settings. So in this case we are using the default, but you can go back to the one which you wanted. If you have the multiple, you can play with them. So let's go to the inventory. So in this case hardware inventory. The machine is slow because it's not my machine. So this inventory here, if you can see here under classes, you can configure the required hardware classes. If you don't have those classes, you can create it, which I've explained in that section of my course. But in this in fact we talked about how to extend it the specific hardware. Let's take one of the base example. Let's take boot data, or let's take this boot data. This information is not coming up. So inside this, whatever the WMI attributes and the class information is, that all can be pulled up and that would be reported back to SCCM server. That's how the hardware inventory is coming up. So in this case the installed programs also ticked up here somewhere. That's why you're getting that inventory under system resources. If you can see here, for the 64-bit and 32-bit we have taken as a checkbox. So by default Microsoft gives the few of the classes will be taken out. In fact I have not done here anything. This is a default configuration what we are trying to look at here. So this is where if you enable, it comes under Resource Explorer. Once you are able to see in the Resource Explorer, that means you can go back to your reports and drill down the reports relevant to that. If you don't find a report, write up relevant to that. So to find out the exact SQL table name or view name, I did give you very good examples in the SQL reporting side for the creation. If you are completely dummy or completely zero or in the SQL knowledge also, you can build a very complex queries with the help of the SQL designing tool, SQL query designing tool in fact. So you can use that to design a specific query. So this is about the hardware inventory side, how it is pulling up. So you can talk about hardware inventory is coming from WMI, and whatever the classes you are enabled, that is only coming up. Whereas the software inventory, let me jump into software inventory. Software inventory is nothing but your in keyboard you are F3. When I say F3, so if you hit F3 it just searches, right? So exactly it's gonna perform the same thing. So what it is doing is it's going to set the file types. So here if you can see here, the file type is .exe. So it's gonna search on your C drive and D drive, whatever the hard drives, that's called fixed drives in the SCCM terminology, or all the hard disk in this case. So it's just going back and it is trying to search star.exe. Whatever the exes it's found, on top of that exes, it's pulling up the inventory information. So let me show you that. Let's take any of the exe, maybe in the C. When I say all the hard disks, so definitely it can be anywhere, right? So it can be in the program files also. So I'm just going back to the bin somewhere, and I don't care what is this. So this exe example, system setup.exe. So this exe properties, it will go and it will read all those details. So for example, file description, file type, these are the left side values for example, file description, file type, file version, product name, product version, copyright, size, date modified. All these are unique, but the right side values changes for each exe. All right, so what happens is this will just go ahead and it will search in the entire hard disk for any of the exes that are available, and it just show you as a report format, so with a good report. So that's a major difference. So if you don't want just the exes, you can extend maybe DLLs, or maybe a license file, or LIC, or maybe a different files. You want to find out where is the LD files, for example, here. So these things can be configured for the software inventory. So these are the differences you can tell to the other end. And let's jump into another question. Maybe for now, it's been almost 35 minutes. What are the logs maybe you can use for inventory purpose? So we did I think this question been already answered or more detailedly explained in the hardware inventory section. But if we can go back to another question, let's go into the designing side, or maybe operation side of the questions, so that if I just run with the console side, I can I may get it my own a few of the questions too. For example, if you can see here, asset intelligent, we did talk about the asset intelligent here, how to import Microsoft Volume licensing and as well as a third-party licensing. So that would be most interesting one if you can explain to someone. They really like it, but not everybody knows this, how to produce the SAM report. When I say SAM, software asset management. So if you have any questions, so like to tell me what you have done, the greatest achievement within the SCCM. So you can very well explain about the wake on LAN and power management, asset intelligent. These are the innovative things or great ideas that companies save a lot of cost, in fact, by implementing this. But very rare people will be implemented because of the lack of skills, maybe. I would say by producing the Microsoft Volume licensing, you come to know how many exact CAL licenses, how many device licenses you have, and how many third-party licenses you have in your infrastructure. That drills down into the exact point, and that gives you more confidence on you and more attention on the tool itself altogether. And coming back to another question, maybe here I can think about software metering. So into the software metering, not all these rules by default, these rules will be automatically created. So that means, for example, there is a user, he uses application called ABC. So when he starts the ABC application, there is in the background some kind of exe files gets triggered, or some kind of files are getting executed. So to that relevant exes gets automatically rules will be created. So once you have the rules automatically created, all you have to do is simply enable those rules. So in this case, the rules are not enabled by default. So you have an option here. Hey, do you want that rule to be enabled? So simply enable that. That would automatically gives you the more information about the software metering. And we did even talk about the reports relevant to the software metering. Which produces the report. In fact, it takes some time to produce the reports, but once the data is available, I did showing you the reports, in fact. And coming back to the compliance settings, this is where the more important configuration you can do it, and you can show up to your to the future company that you have very great experience or related to the compliances. So especially with the when it started with the SCCM, we used to call as desired configuration management, or sometimes also DCM. Now it's all about the configuration called the compliance settings. So in this compliance settings, you can also now configure OneDrive profiles, remote connection profiles, also the ATP, which is the Microsoft related other configurations. But we focus more into the configuration items as well as the baseline. Say example, your company has decided some configuration not to be run. For example, let's take one example. Maybe because of the SMB 1.0 version, all the machines are getting infected with the ransomware. So you don't want that application to be run. But few people may be installing SMB 1.1 or wondered, oh, in that case, you can create a baseline. If found that SMB version as a feature in any of the machine, you can simply uninstall as a remediation to be taken. So it's an ongoing process. You found something as a non-complaint, you would automatically remediate that with the software applications can be targeted, or if it is a registry key, it does automatically on its own. If not, you create a collection based on the non-complaint. In fact, I did showing you that how to create a dynamic collections related to the compliance management, and then target one time one application. That's it. If it is a non-complaint, this software gets automatically since the machine becomes as the target to remediate that with the software distribution, it gets remediated and it gets built. So that kind of configurations you can do it. Let's jump back to Microsoft Edge profiles. You can do it, but how it's going to be addressed, I really don't know in the future, because Chromium, a new browser, is coming up. So in that situation, what happens, I don't know, but you have a lot of time. But you can create your own profiles, like Wi-Fi profile. You can create the firewall profiles. Many things can be really done and can be automated with the compliance settings. Let's jump into the endpoint protection. We did configure even the endpoint protection. In this case, the endpoint protection related malwares, if it is infected, what to be done. Nobody knows much other than the Microsoft, maybe because it's their property. They know that what files to be excluded, what files not to be excluded. But at the same time, it's a common target, so you never know who's gonna target. So now with the Defender and the ATP policies, it's going to be more and more a cloud-based solution. So your endpoint protection is completely moving towards to the cloud. So it's going to be a best that if you started learning about the endpoint protection. Let's talk about the corporate owned devices, which are nothing but your co-management related, like you want to wipe up them, or you want to go for hybrid configuration, you can do that. So let's jump into the software library in this case. So in the software library, we talked about the applications and and packages versus difference, and the log files and the deployment types, we talked about it, and phased deployments, which maybe I've not talked about. Yeah, in fact I've not talked, but I'm going to produce later point the phased deployments. But this is where the future for the phased operating system deployment, phased application deployment. Phased is in a such a way that you're actually achieving in the pilot to general availability, and then going forward to the other availability, maybe to the production machines. So it will be going in a phased manner altogether. And also you can simulate the applications. So this is also one of the important option to simulate whether this application is gonna run actually as a successful or not. So some of the companies will also use a simulate. In fact, we also talked about the approval request from the application web catalog. So that would be one of the important, if it is a smaller company, or even the larger companies also will be using as a self-service. If you published everything and open for the users, all you have to do is just manage with the approval request. So you can create a role-based administration from the SCCM console point of view, and then grant that permissions to your RBAC permissions to your help desk team, so they would happily manage. In fact, we did talk about the application automated deployment, which is nothing but in our case we created Active Directory security group, and then we created security group based SCCM collections and targeted the required applications. For example, MS Office 2013 Professional Edition should be targeted, so we created that specific AT group and created a collection and deployed to that collection. So help desk team, what they do is simply, if they receive a request to push that specific software, they're simply adding the machine to the AT group. That's it. The collection gets automatically updated, and the machine will be part of that collection, and boom, automatically the software gets pushed out. And we also talked about the AppV And also we talked about the software distribution. Think about it, you might have one of the interview question would be talk about complete step-by-step process from the background. So you should talk about how the software update point works basically. So you should talk about the WSS as a pre-requirement and how the classification of the products and the active soup and the source of the soup, and then when it is synced up, what exactly it is syncing is going to be metadata or the entire software. Definitely it's going to be metadata information. And once you approve, how do you approve? For example, it's going to be a second Tuesday, then you would be using mostly ADRs to automatically deploy, because it's going to be repeated task and you don't want that to be manual task anymore. So as a first step, it's going to be pushed to the pilot users with the ADRs. Then you validate the results, and then you would be creating manually the monthly patches. And once the patch management is started, you would be monitoring the critical reports. In fact, I did shown you the reports which I have taken from one of my managed client account with the proper live reports. Uh, you can view the reports to troubleshoot further and check the compliance levels and the compliance percentage. All that to be going to be a active monitoring task for you. If you are using ADR, it's simple as that, but remember that it might lead to some kind of confusion or some kind of load on the server by downloading, deploying a lot of the patches, and sometimes you don't know what is happening even with the ADR. So as per Microsoft, the recommendation would be the ADRs for your pilots, but not for the actual deployment, because every time the business owners doesn't give the maintenance time, so you would have to configure maintenance windows anyway manually, or you may have to agree with them, or maybe changes their maintenance window sometimes, because not every time they give the same maintenance window. It all depends on scenario to scenario, company to company, business user to business user. So it's all about business, in fact, because you're taking the service to a down and you're bringing up the service up. So in between, if something goes wrong, everybody is responsible, not just you, including the Microsoft also responsible, because the patches might not be tested properly, or maybe tested on their environment but not on your environment. So it might cause a issue. So you may have to, in that situation, you may have to reach the Microsoft to troubleshoot further. And then if they know that it's a bug, they may release as a private patch for you, and then they also they also release later point as the complete fix. But these are the things normally would happen under, especially for the patch management. Now with the third party software updates also, now you can do it. I'm gonna do this as the extra activity or the bonus lecture, because this feature is recently added, and I'm gonna cover that later point, because I just wanted to finish this course fast, and then whatever it was missing, the topics also will be added. Operating system deployment is a huge one which we talked about it, and in fact all the possible scenarios we did as a live demonstration. So it is a great opportunity for you to learn starting from the operating system deployment, very basic, like Windows 7 to Windows 10 migrations, and the 10 to 10 side by side refresh bare metal with the user state backup. If you want to deploy without touching anything, like a zero touch, light touch, we also integrated the MGT and automated image capturing. In fact, we also covered the SOE engineering part for the creation of the images. We have done much into the operating system deployment. You can check that, in fact, and I think that's the major sections which are available in the my course. If I can go back, if I can go back and check, it's yes, exactly, it's almost 9 hours 51 minutes, especially on more focused, very focused on operating system deployment. So think that, how much efforts we are, putting to learn each possible scenario. We also talked about Windows as a service. That means the rings mechanism we use to deploy the patches. So that's a new and the advanced concept, where actually the instead of using the operating system deployment mechanism, we also use the Windows 10 servicing method. So from here we used the servicing plans, and all of them we tried to create and we deployed it. We also talked about the monitoring, especially how to monitor, as we just talked about the site status is a fast action which you would monitor daily, in fact, or frequently. You can set up the alerts to automatically send you an emails. This would be one of the question, at least in your exam. How do you set up alerts, or maybe setting up some kind of alerts, and also the queries which are WQL queries. Instead, directly work on the collections. What happens is, as a starting, when you start your career, or maybe if you're the beginner, I would say, at least this is the right word. Maybe if you're the beginner, you don't change, you try to change against the collection query directly on the collection, but don't do that in fact, because when you try to do here, if something goes wrong, what happens is the membership changes. When you talk about the membership, the actual count of the objects changes. So the impact is, what happens if the device is already if that collections has different targets. Say example, operating system deployment is there, maybe patch management is there, so you are impacting a very huge impact. You're changing the collection membership, and the life would lead to job loss also sometimes. In fact, if you are not conscious what you're trying to do, if something goes wrong, it's a big impact to the big impact from the SCCM side, because SCCM, the way it uses for the good purpose, sometimes it may lead to the bad if you missed out a small mistake, especially to the collections management. So that's why never touch the collections directly. Instead, go and check here under monitoring queries. Okay, you try to create here the queries, the required queries. Once you are happy with the query output, so for example, I want all the users example. So once I run this query or build this query, and if I feel that this data is what I'm looking and it is exact data, then go back here and save as it is that query, and you can recall by creating the collections and import that query. So that would be the best and recommended method, in fact. We also talked about the reporting, and in the reporting we also talked about how to create the reports. The most important point would be here for the reports, whatever the custom reports you make it's not going to be backed up by default, so you should be taking as additional backup all these reports and their queries. So make sure that you should save somewhere. Whenever you create any custom report, make sure that you save the SQL query as well as the export that to DRL. I mean, the if you just export that automatically, that gets actually you can import later point with the DRL, but not from here. In fact, you should be able to do it from the SQL reporting services mechanism, not just the SCCM. And we also talked about monitoring side and the deployments. We talked phase deployments a little bit, we touched up client operations, and we have touched very advanced topics, especially for the core management, cloud management, and that specific related things can be monitored from here altogether. And I wanted to show you something here for the patch management. If you're trying to do surface, because since I just saw surface, if you're trying to patch the surface is not like as the normal patches. So yes, it just the normal patch for operating system, but they also release as a Microsoft every time the drivers update and the firmware update. So make sure that you actually configure your and tested, in fact, not just the configuration, also you should test this configuration especially. Let me show you that configuration. If I just go back to my components here, software update point. This is where let me once again, oh, I'm sorry, that's got closed up. Software update point under updates, sorry, classification, you do have here the checkbox. When you enable this checkbox, it automatically downloads and keeps for you the Surface related firmware as well as the driver. So in fact, that's very much recommended because of the driver management, also very important, especially for the Surface kind of devices. This is one of the key thing. In fact, I did covered this topic by explaining the same thing in the patch management as far as I remember. And that's all I would cover. In fact, we also covered distribution point groups, and for the migration you can connect it with the old hierarchies or the another hierarchy, and then migrate all those objects to the new hierarchy, which we have not talked about it, but that's okay. This is